and out of the residue, another 10% goes for food procurement operations. And it's only the balance which is deployed in industrial credit. In other words, and also, the priority sector has been always enjoying concessionary rates of interest. Food procurement is also at a concessionary rate of interest. Only the industrial credit is supposed to be at normal commercial rates of interest. This in brief is the broad structure of how a bank is organized and functions. Now, Narasimha Committee's report flows from three basic premises. In fact, it's worthwhile to recall that Professor Wilson of Bristol University, UK, has described the Indian banking system as a bulb-shaped structure, a narrow neck at the top, a narrow base at the bottom, and a bulbous middle, and which keeps bulging day by day. In other words, its stability is very fragile, and a slight push could perhaps bring it to problems. This apart, the world over, the banking system has been in turmoil. Even in India, there has been the winds of change blowing across the land. One fundamental change which has come over the banking system is that people use banking not for security but for financial services. And once the emphasis of the financial services has come in, the need to constantly innovate, the need to be constantly in the marketplace, the need to anticipate what the customer wants, these are all becoming new rules of the game. Now, coming to the Narasimha Committee's report, as I mentioned, there are three basic premises. Firstly, the committee wants to impart competitive efficiency to the financial sector, just as the nation as a whole is endeavoring to impart competitive efficiency to the industrial sector. Two, for this the financial system should be healthy and profitable. Three, to achieve this, banks must also have operational flexibility and also autonomy in decision making. The overall aim of the Narasimha Committee recommendation is to preserve the enormous quantitative gains achieved by the banking industry while improving the quality of performance. In fact, a few days ago, delivering the Sir Purushottam Das Thakur Das Memorial Lecture at Bombay, Mr. Narasimham has dwelt at length about this committee recommendations, and he has also drawn the attention of the readers to the enormous gains which have been achieved by the banking industry. Beginning from 1969, there has been a sevenfold increase in the number of branches. Population per branch has come down from about 65,000 to about 12,000. There are 400 million deposit accounts, over 400,000 priority sector accounts. So his emphasis is that our aim should be to preserve the quantitative gains while improving the quality of performance. So trying to crystallize the issues for addressing itself, the committee tried to find out what's the problem with the banking industry. One of the major problems of the banking industry is that its income is depressed. It is not in a position to earn what it should normally earn. The committee has pointed out two areas. One, directed credit, the other, directed investments. When he is talking of directed credit, he talks of the priority sector. And priority sector includes a host of other things, and the earnings from which is much lower than what it normally should be. Then when it comes to directed investments, both the CRR and the SLR, which initially made their appearance as by way of prudential norms, have become, to use the words of the committee, a reserve requirement tax on the banking system. Because the banks don't earn the normal rates of interest or the market-related rates of interest on these monies left with the Reserve Bank or in the investments. Well, what are talking further, the consequences of the directed credit. Initially, apart from the internal inflexibilities, internal contradictions, the constant increase in the external pressure on decision making and the gradual conversion of socialization of credit into the politicization of credit has perhaps brought a situation to such a pass that one wonders whether that the basic premise that social banking is not contrary to sound banking, that premise itself is being questioned. The committee has pointed attention to the loan mailers, the loan waivers, which have done a grave damage to the credit delivery system. So you may wonder, if the banks are not earning enough, if the banks are also having increasing loan delinquencies and also a weak assets portfolio, why is it is not being disclosed? Why is it is not being debated? The main reason is that the banking system has been by law and convention permitted not to disclose the true income or profits. Even yesterday the Financial Express carries one editorial on the computerization of the banking. The whole analysis is a bit twisted because it is based on the published figures and not the true figures. We always ask our customers to give the balance sheets, pour over them with a tooth comb. But when it comes to the bank balance sheets are not transparent enough. The law permits us not to disclose our true income, but knock off the provisions we make. The law permits us not to disclose our assets minus the losses. If you really see the bank balance sheet, when the assets or investments or advances are broken up into 4 categories, considered pretty good, then against the collateral security, against guarantee, the last column is loans which are considered bad and doubtful but not provided for, it is always 0, and that 0 is because we are supposed to have made provisions to the satisfaction of the auditors. So this again is one of the points which have been highlighted by the Narasimha committee, that the recommendations made by the Ghosh committee on the final the publication of the balance sheets of the banks and the adoption by the bank of the standards set by the International Institute of Chartered Accountants about the disclosure, these should be adopted. And also the banks to follow uniform procedures in recognition of income. For instance, in the Western world, if any income is not realized for 180 days, then the bank has to fully provide for that. And lastly, even on assets which are bad, we go on providing income on an accrual basis, interest on an accrual basis, which again is taxed by the tax authorities. In other words, the world of make-believe goes on. So Narasimha committee has drawn the attention to the fact that we should publish our balance sheet, make it more and more transparent. The recommendations made by the committee falls into 2 broad categories. One is the improvement of profitability. 2, enhancing the operational flexibility and autonomy in decision making. Now, what are the measures for improving the profitability of the banking system? SLR, the statutory liquidity ratio, the committee is recommended should be brought down from 38.5 to 25%, and the interest rate must be related to the market rates. And CRR, very rightly, the committee has conceded or recognized the fact that it's a prerogative of the Reserve Bank to use the CRR as an instrument of monetary control. However, it's only fair that the banks are compensated adequately, and they should be paid interest at a level equivalent to 1 year deposit rates. Today these are much, much lower. And the committee has also suggested the redefinition of the priority sector. Remember, the committee has not called for denationalization of the banks, public sector banks. But the committee has called for a positive statement of the government that no further bank would be nationalized. It has not called for the abolition of the priority sector. It has called for the redefinition of the priority sector to include only small marginal farmers, tiny sector and other weaker sections, and to fix it at 10%. The committee has pointed out that in the scheme of things, it is not the concession rate of interest but the prompt availability of credit which is more important. And if at all you want to show any preference to a particular sector, let it be through the refinance mechanism, and let all the changes be introduced by the Reserve Bank. Reserve Bank should be the final arbiter of the level of interest rates, and the anchor for this should be the bank rate. That also has been repeatedly emphasized. The committee has also recommended that branch licensing scheme should be abolished. The bank should be given the freedom. Introduction freedom for the private sector banks to establish new banks. Foreign banks also to operate freely, provided they comply with the minimum capital requirements. However, there is an emphasis that a level playing field should be provided to all. The rationale for this, Mr. Narasimhan has explained, is that getting foreign banks to come in and allowing them to operate freely means that the Indian banking system will also learn to be more competitive. It will be an opportunity for them to upgrade their own technology. And ultimately the consumer will benefit. Then coming to the operational flexibility and autonomy in decision making, the committee's recommendations, this particular set of recommendations, are being debated in a very heated way. The recommendations are that the Reserve Bank nominee on the boards of directors should not be there. The committee has recommended that the Reserve Bank, the various laws should also be amended to provide for it. Two members who disagree have got to the extent of saying that there should be no representative from the government and the banking division should be abolished. In other words, the key phrase is the duality of control, because the committee mentions that today the banking system is over-administered and over-regulated. The duality of control should end. That no government department, no ministry should directly deal with the banks. They all should deal only with the Reserve Bank of India. It even talked that the appointment of chairman of the board of directors should be through a committee of experts who should be invited by the Reserve Bank of India governor to be members. They should make the recommendation. The recommendation should be invariably accepted. Well, in fact, in the Purushottam Das Thakurdas Memorial Lecture, he has even pointed out that today even the tools of chairman by bank chairman when they go abroad has to be approved by the government. So this is one extent of the kind of control the government exercises. Therefore, they want the duality of control to be ended. But these in brief for the recommendations of the committee, and the committee has also emphasized that they have also made quite a few recommendations regarding the rural branches. For instance, rural branches, it has been suggested that the bank should form subsidiaries to take over rural branches. They could form number of subsidiaries for compact areas. The committee has recommended that RRB should be permitted to operate as freely as other banks. Then to help the banks to clean up their weak assets portfolio as a one-time measure, the committee has suggested the creation of an asset reconstruction fund, which will buy at a discount the loan portfolio of the weak loan portfolio of the various banks at a discount. The value of the discount to be determined by 2 independent auditors, chartered accountants. And compensation should be paid to the bank in the form of bonds, on which interest will be a source of income. But if you really look at it as a systemic approach, I think the committee has done a commendable job. Whether we agree with the recommendations or not is not a point to dispute or not a point to be discussed. But the fact is they have taken a total comprehensive look. This perhaps, I think, in a large measure is due to the fact that Mr. Narasimhan has had a very, very experienced person in the Reserve Bank, then in the Ministry of Finance, and later in the Governor of the Reserve Bank, and he has also operated as a representative executive director to both the IBRD and also IMF, and later the ADB. Today he is the chairman of the Administrative Staff College, Hyderabad. Then the committee has also highlighted the urgency to go ahead with the updating of technology and a greater thrust to the computerization efforts. Even yesterday, the Financial Express lead article talks about the peripheral efforts only today. As far as the Rangarajan Committee's latest recommendations November 1990 are concerned, that really nothing much has been done. That's the essence of the article. Because this is one area where service can improve. And the committee has also taken the banking system to task, saying that they were really not tried hard. They have been giving the lame excuse of the so-called resistance of the unions. They have not really tried hard to get over the problem. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present this bill. Thank you. Permitted to operate freely, they can be encouraged to form even mutual joint venture organization with foreign banks if need be, and giving them the same level playing field. Another thing is, the committee has asked that the government should come out with a statement that there won't be any further nationalization of banks. Earlier, 100 crores used to be the magic figure. If anybody crosses that, there was a problem.
May I ask you all questions, sir? Yes, please. About the bank and also from committee. About the management side, I think we discussed.
Yeah.
That is a very important thing.
Yeah. I didn't go into the detail of the recommendation. Talking to the management, the committee has pointed out that the organization structure, the management structure is a 3-tier structure or a 4-tier structure, depending upon the spread of the network of branches. We, for instance, in the State Bank, we have a central office, we have the local head office, and we have the regional offices and the branches. That's the 4-tier structure. In some, you see, 1 tier is reduced. Well, the committee has only talked about that apart from the structure, it's the delegation of powers, the authority, which is important. And the one important point which has also been commented is the changing profile of the banker. Today the specialist has come to stay, and therefore you see there should be more of specialists, and perhaps the change you see in the policies today followed by the banks for the reward, and also the meritorious should be given their due recognition. And they have not come up with any sweeping changes about the way the bank should be organized or run. But the committee repeatedly mentioned that the bank should have the freedom to take a decision free from interference from outside. They should be in a position to decide, and they should only look to the Reserve Bank. And even the Reserve Bank, there's a chapter in the supervisory arrangements. It should be based on prudential norms like minimum capital requirement, minimum reserve ratios, and also the health code system for the assets portfolio and things like that. And it should be more of off-site inspections rather than on-site inspections. In other words, I think the only key element of all the recommendations is give full freedom for the banks to operate and give the management autonomy to do so.
One more question. Does the committee have anything to say about the recent emergence of mutual funds? Yeah.
See, the committee has taken an overview of the entire capital market and the money market, the various kinds of institutions which have come. And as far as the mutual funds are concerned, the committee has proposed the creation of an appropriate regulatory framework through special legislation, what you call an arm's length relationship, because the mutual fund come to know how the real health of a particular corporate body. They should not use that information to operate in the market. Therefore, the arm's length relation concept. Prevention of conflict of interest, and also indication the role of fund managers and other related matters. In fact, the committee has recommended that the SEBI should provide the guidelines for operation of mutual funds. And only 2 days back, SEBI through ordinance has been given the teeth, and we hope that they will be in a position to handle this.
There is some sort of price competition between the mutual funds.
Yeah. And price competition is also going to come to the banks. If you recall the Sukumar Chakravarti Committee's report on the monetary system, they pointed out that today there is no price competition on the bank, only service competition. This will not do, then they should be permitted only up to 1 year. The government should fix, the rest of it should be fixed by the banks themselves. And that's the tactic in UK. UK, the lead bank, everybody looks to which bank is going to take the initiative, and everybody will go around fixing that. But then the committee also pointed out one consequences of one initiative taken some time back when the rates of interest were free to a particular point, but what happened was everybody tried to fix it at the maximum ceiling, and that became the rule rather than the exception. They see errors of this should be avoided. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, Chair, want to ask a question?
Yes, Mr. President, I want to ask your opinion personally, and knowing that we are strictly your personal opinion, on two rather more basic questions. One, from what you described as the National Committee report and what I've been reading now, so I came to late, I caught up on what the committee has given a series of directions which the government should move, and particularly towards the increased autonomy of the banking system and the gradual phasing out of a variety of highly sort of directed social banking directives, which in fact led to a sharp deterioration of the bank, among other problems of the economy. How do you believe that the bureaucracy will ever go voluntarily? Why I ask you is this: not liberalization attempts were made all through Eastern Europe from the 60s onwards. And I had once attended a seminar where citizens of Hungary and Yugoslavia after the liberalization had been intensively discussed by, among others, people like Professor Kornai of Hungary, who is one of the architects of Hungary's reform, and others. In that, what came out very clearly was that over 5 or 10 years after the major drastic liberalization, the bureaucracy found 100 ways of reasserting control, both in Yugoslavia as well as in Hungary. This is not a matter of ideology. This is a matter of the lust for power. So what disturbs me about this newspaper report that I heard in Dr. Narasimhan Committee's report when it first was presented, and there were these items in the financial papers, was that Mr. Narasimhan's committee wants to keep structures intact, but just says, please behave differently. What is the guarantee that they'll behave differently, if any? Second, and what is your impression? I mean, you have dealt on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to bring this. The second is, you talk about a level playing field. Presumably, the foreign banks don't have obligations to give 10% of the lending to priority sectors. In that case, how can the playing field ever be level? And if under those circumstances you allow the foreign and private banks to open branches, etc., how long will it be before the entire state banking system withers away as people get more and more autonomy and start shifting their funds and their savings to private?
Afterwards, after Mr. Narasimhan, I think
it has to be allowed in some form or other, if not 100% to a major extent. I have one specific reason for making this comment. Beginning from 1992 March, the balance sheets of banks are going to be recast. I happen to be a member of the Host Committee. The report of the final accounts of banks have now made some important changes whereby the gross profit of banks is going to be a true profit. The income is going to be published without any depression. And the banks are also obliged to show all the loan loss, all the provisions they make as a one-item entry. In other words, the kind of fig leaf which everybody had is going to disappear. I think once the balance sheets are going to be published, it is going to raise a lot of debate in the country and the pressure is going to build up. In fact, I have appeared before several parliamentary committees, Irasian and quite a few others, Mansiram and others, Estimates Committee, Irasian was the published accounts. They were used to ask a pointed question, what is your bad debts, what is your bad provision, what is this provision? We said, sorry, we are not obliged to tell you all this. We could get away, but no longer. Therefore, I think this fundamental change, the transparency, the increasing transparency in the final accounts of banks is going to create a climate whereby the truth will be known to a large extent. And that perhaps could act as the best instrument for accelerating the recommendations, the implementation of the recommendations contained in the National Committee. Apart from this, I don't think I have any other answer to Mr. John. The second question which he raised is about the level playing field that the foreign banks are going to observe. Well, I have operated at Bombay for nearly 8 years. There have been a lot of problems in the past, particularly foreign banks in procurement and priority. They have not been able to enforce the same rules. I really don't know, but the hope is that they might. Perhaps, I think the National Committee is looking more at the positive side of things. One is to encourage competition and give the impetus for the updating of technology. I don't think this aspect is really raised in the National Committee. My only answer therefore is it could happen, or the fears expressed by Mr. John could also happen. At the moment, I cannot say anything conclusively. The third aspect he mentioned about was the deficit. I think while talking of the sequencing of the reforms and the implementing the recommendation, National Committee has really mentioned that the starting point of all this is the control of the fiscal deficit. Only when that is controlled, other things will fall in place, because if you say directed investment should be reduced from 38.5% back to 25%, that means the further money into the banking system will give for the financing of the public system will get reduced. Now, unless the deficit are also controlled, the two cannot be matched. The pressure will continue to be there. The other aspect which National Committee has pointed out is he talked about the priority, the plight of the poor in Patna and all that. I think the social redistributive responsibility should lie in the realm of fiscal policy and not in the banking system. That's one of the points he was mentioning. He had mentioned that whatever the government wants to do, let them do it through the fiscal. Let them not burden it on the banking system. Of course, as And as a system, the banks also should take up housing and projects like that will have to come in. That's the reason why the committee has also pointed out that there need not be any watertight compartments between the development institution and the banks, that development institution give only term loans and project loans, and the later you see give only the working capital loans. They should take up both. Perhaps if this kind of a culture spreads, they perhaps will take up more and more of the projects. I think Mr. John, is very difficult to answer all your questions with full conviction and also in a complete fashion. The problem you are raising is very real, but at the moment we are not in a position to precisely anticipate what is going to happen and what is not going to happen. I think with these limitations, I must say that I leave it to you to debate and discuss and perhaps suggest what else could be talked about or clarified. Any further questions?
It's not a question at all. It's more in the nature of a clarification, because Mr. President has covered very eminently what I wanted to ask him. And I'd just like to make a small clarification. I think the issue at stake which we are discussing is the role of social banking. Now, as I understood Mr. Narasimhan's lecture just now, what he told us about the role of banking and what Mr. President apparently very deftly convinces us that there is no role at all for social banking. I would like to slightly differ here. I'd like to ask in that case, if we allow entire banking to be a purely game of free market approach, like it's there in the Western world, the developed world, now will that be the most appropriate mechanism to take up development or to look into the issues of economic development of the country which is not fully developed? We are still not the same level of development as in the West. I'm not an economist, neither a banker. I'm quite a layman. I would like to understand what should, in that case, be the mechanism of initiating or at least working as a catalyst to take up the role of development. My question simply is, as it points very correctly, that it should be left to the government department, or let's say this should be precisely the role of financing institutions. But I guess if they take up a purely market-oriented approach, there is no business at all in that kind of approach for any kind of social banking or any kind of incremental positive assistance. I repeat, incremental positive assistance to be given to the weaker sections or to the undeveloped ones or to the unprivileged ones or to the underprivileged ones. Now, in a developing economy like ours, which we have yet to acquire the status of a developed economy, I think my own perception of a limited layman is that the government is itself crippled with its financial resources, and the only money available is through the banking. Now, that was precisely the role why the banks were in the first place nationalized, to give them a purpose, to give them a social motive behind the entire banking. Now, the fact that they have not been implemented properly, what Mr. President very deftly again describes it, that what has happened in Bihar, say take the example of Gandhi Maidan having been converted because there are no shelters. That's a problem that has not been taken care of properly. Does not mean that the problem or the approach itself is defective. There is a solution available, but probably it has not been implemented properly. It's like throwing the baby with the bathtub. Therefore, describing that the approach to social banking itself is wrong. I don't think that. I mean, this is just not true. Probably approach to social banking has not been implemented properly. There is still a scope where social banking, even if it has a limited role, can be made profitable. If it cannot be made profitable, that much money should be written off in any case, because that contribution, that's a liability, that's the responsibility of any responsible government. And the government does not have enough resources to take up development in a one go. It has got to depend on the money wherever it comes from. And any small developing economy, the money can only come from the banking institutions. Now, therefore, I am absolutely convinced.
I think it's very difficult to accept the contention that the banking system has no social responsibility as far as the economy is concerned or the nation at large is concerned. See, the crucial issue is that the banking system, where does the money come from? It should come basically from profits.
May I make a small correction, sir?
Yeah.
The money does not belong to government. The money belongs to
The
savers.
people.
Those who save money have the right to expect the
Exactly.
best return. And the saving is mostly done, the bulk comes from small people,
Housing sector.
not from large.
Housing sector.
And I did not say that there should be no help at all to the poor. I said don't load this on the banking system.
I think this is going to be a debate, and it has
perfect.
entitled a full-fledged seminar in its own right.
I hope that's the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with it. But I did tell you right at the beginning, as long as there are seminars, there are going to be a number of speakers scheduled. Sometimes we have to.
No intervention, Mr. President, I'm sorry.
There's nothing we can do about it. It just happens to be one of those realities. And all the points raised are valid. Nobody could ever dispute it. Sometimes it goes back to the basic philosophy of government and what you propose to do and how you propose to do. Really, I think goes back to the philosophy itself. So if there are no more comments from Mr. Narasimhan, Mr.
I can only say that yesterday also Mr. Kamala Prasad used the phrase light at the end of the tunnel, but there is a phrase, modern twist to that. The light at the end of the tunnel could be the headlights of an oncoming train.
Mr. President and distinguished guests, since yesterday we have been hearing distinguished speakers on various aspects of globalization of free market and introduction of free market economy in India. In my paper, I have tried to discuss the strategies the Indian firm should take to compete in the international market. As we know, that India, despite of having a large number of trained manpower, natural resources, and different, natural resources and also the cheap labor available, yet we are controlling only 0.6% of the world export market. So what should be the strategies the Indian industries, both in the private or public sector, should take to enter into the international marketing area? When we talk of marketing strategies, the marketing strategies go through the 4 important stages. The first stage, which in the marketing management parlance we call the identification of the consumer needs. So far, the Indian firms have done a good job in the domestic market of finding out their consumer needs, which I can illustrate with an example of the two-wheeler scooter industry, the Bajaj Auto Limited. Till the later part of the 70s and the early 80s, when the LML or the Kinetic or the other manufacturers of scooters like Namada, they were not in the Indian market. The Bajaj Auto Limited was just selling a product, that is a Bajaj scooter, to the Indian consumers without taking into account their needs. If we see the scooter of that period of Bajaj, we don't find any product improvement or certain product features as we see in different brands of Bajaj today in the market. Once the element enter into the market of India or the Kinetic Honda, we see that Bajaj has come out with different brands. Certain brand proliferation in the Indian market with Bajaj Club 100cc scooter or the 150cc scooter, and finally for export market the Bajaj Chetak. So the need of the hour is that in the first stage of strategy, the Indian firm should find out what the international consumers want. What is the actual need? Once they know the need, as they have succeeded in the Indian market, I am confident they can be successful in the international market also. As we find out this need, then we move to the second strategy of marketing, that is finding out the opportunities. Where are the opportunities? We know there are certain industries in which India enjoys international competitiveness, like in the tea, in gems and jewelry, which is rather the topmost foreign exchange earning industry for India at present. Then an industry, service industry like tourism, which is also the second most largest foreign exchange earning industry. But what is the scenario in these industries? Let us take the example of this tea industry of India. We find different brands available in the Indian market, say the Taj or the Lipton, different brands. But unfortunately, in the international market, the global market, we find that we are selling only the tea leaves, not only even a single package branded tea from India or any Indian industry. Why is this? Suppose, or take the example of the soap. We find different varieties of international soap in India, but can give me any examples that India's Godrej soap of this, say, the crowning glory available in the market of New York or say in the markets of European countries? No. So we have to find out that where the opportunities lie. What are the opportunities in the industry? If we are going to export tea, then we have to sell the branded tea. Then if we are going to sell say service products like tourism products, we have to take into account that we are not selling just only one product, that is selling Mystic East to our foreign customers. But India is having different product mixes of these tourism products, like say the cultural tourism, the convention tourist products, the adventure tourist products, which we need to promote. Then comes once we see these opportunities, the third stage of that is the identifying the segments in which we can target our products. The Indian industries must find out the segment instead of going for the markets where the competition is very keen, like the European markets or say the Western Bloc markets in the United States or in the Far East. We can start with the SAARC member countries market, like this Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka. And then gradually we can move and make entry into the Far Eastern countries market like Singapore or say Japan or for example in Thailand and so on. Once we segment this market, next we can go to the final stage, that is what we call the developing a proper marketing mix blend. What is this marketing mix blend? That is, we have to take into account the four major factors or the variables of marketing mix, that is the product, price, the place, and the promotion. In case of product, as I have stated earlier, that we have to brand and develop the brand, and the industries should establish their brand identity in the international market by incorporating certain features or the which in marketing called the unique selling proposition. I will give an example again from Indian domestic market. Some years back, a toothpaste manufacturer, Indian toothpaste manufacturer, Balsara, their toothpaste promise gave a serious challenge to Colgate, the product of a multinational firm that Colgate found. How? By incorporating certain features or unique selling propositions like incorporating this clove oil benefit for the consumers. Their protection to take this campaign compelled the Colgate people to come out with a campaign that is called the Colgate Ring of Protection. So in that way, once we establish our product or the brand identity, then the industries can go for the place or the distribution outlets. How can they distribute their products to the world market? This can only be done in cases there are branded products like the Telco's vehicles or say the Dabar's products. They have got a very good brand image even outside India. But for unbranded products, what Indian industries should take care of that they should enter into tie-ups with established retail outlets in the in the international scene, like this Walmart or the Woolworths, and they in turn can sell these products as their brands in the domestic market. And finally, when we come to the question of promotion, so keeping in view this development in the TV network with the help of the satellites, what we can do, the Indian firms can do, that they can advertise their products with the help of this TV network throughout the globe and create a brand awareness. And once that brand awareness of Indian products have been created in the world market, the next stage comes, which Eric Wickland in his book on marketing strategies, international marketing strategies, said that the Japanese did, that is finding out the nakodas. Nakodas, they are the individuals, the active individuals, the agents who act as go between the seller and the consumer. So what we have to do, that instead of spending so much of money on these trade fairs and other events, we can, these industries, both in public sector or the private sector in India, they can do that. They can go in search for this sort of nakoda and request them to sell their products, the products of Indian private sectors in the international market. In fact, I want to conclude with a quotation from Kenichi Ome of Japan, who states the success of Japan depends on the Japanese competitive achievement provides hard evidence that a hallmark of a successful strategy is the creation of sustainable competitive advantage by beating the competition. If it takes world-class manufacturing to win, you have to beat the competitors with your factory. If it takes rapid product development, you have to beat them with your labs. If it takes mastery of distribution channels, you have to beat them with your logistics system. No matter what it takes, the goal of strategy is to beat the competition. Thank you.
I now call upon Dr. Arvind Das to present his paper. Dr. Das is very well known. Whoever reads the Times of India has read him. He is the editor of the Times of India and also a known social.
I'd like to
General Karyappa addressed the troops and chose to speak in Hindi. It was a difficult task for him because not only was he not a political person, but he was also by training very much with the old British Raj heritage. So then General Karyappa addressed the troops in Hindi, and this is what he said. He said, "Spaiyo, आज भारत मुक्त हो गया." Now, when we speak of the free market, it suddenly occurred to me that free could have two connotations. It could have independent, or it could also mean without a price. मुफ्त और आजाद दो मतलब हो सकते हैं free. In the case of the free market, quite obviously we are not talking of anything to do with azadi, and I'll come to this theme a bit later. This session is really about democracy, politics, and the interrelationship between all those things and the free market. In the course of the last year and a half, a large number of things which I wanted to talk about have been already talked about. I will not therefore cover that ground either. I assume that all of you have heard the speakers who spoke yesterday and today. I will only question a few of the things which I feel ought to be questioned in talking of this theme of free market, globalization, liberalization, and so on. And I will question them with the idea that that we accept too many categories and too many concepts, far too easily, and hence perhaps we fall into certain methodological and conceptual traps. It is with that perspective that I am questioning a few of you. For instance, the whole idea that world trade is a good thing and world trade should be increased. Everyone assumes that, and therefore the attempt is that you increase your imports, exports, and so on. And so the other countries also increase their imports, exports. And if everyone is increasing imports and exports, then everyone will benefit. Now this is likely, it's a likely scenario, but it is not inevitable. Because logically, if world trade goes up, it can also turn out to be a zero-sum game. Because your gain has to be somebody else's loss. And the net result can even turn out to be everyone's loss. I'm talking only logic from the point of view of logic. So to assume that world trade must necessarily benefit everyone around the world, increase in world trade, is not logically inevitable. Even if it were inevitable, much would depend on the kind of conditions within which the world trade is carried out. There's been some talk in the relationship between USA and Japan of playing the game of world trade on a level playing field. And the USA has accused Japan of not leveling the field before inviting the Americans to play the game with them. They've complained about the fact that Japan has all kinds of restrictions on imports, that it does not allow American industry to get the advantage of the massive Japanese market, and so on. Now, if the playing field between USA and Japan is not level, is the field on which we are invited to play level? And it is in that perspective again that we should look at this whole issue of globalization and so on. Globalization assumes that there is a global community with all one interest of everyone who is in that. Now, is it so? Yesterday we very briefly talked about the Dunkel proposals
We talked about the Special 301, Super 301, etc., etc. The multilateral system which is being devised, and the unilateral pressures which are being also put. Now, how these things shape up, one does not really know at the moment. But from an analysis which has been done, several analyses which have been done, it is obvious that at best, we are negotiating from a position of weakness. We are still negotiating. That is the best thing that can be said. But we are in a situation of terrible weakness. We are playing on a field which is not level, and we are on the side which is down. One can go through the instances of exactly how this has happened. I don't think it is necessary to do so, but just a few small points about the whole process of international negotiations around trade, I think would be important to realize. When the Tokyo round was concluded, that is the last Tokyo round was concluded, at that time India did represent not only itself and its own interests, but also a big group of nations, called the group of 77, and was articulating their apprehensions, their fears, their problems also. Today, when the Uruguay round is being concluded, at the end of it, we are thoroughly isolated. We are standing by ourselves. Even it is not a single country which is prepared to take our side. It is not that the interests of those countries, the group of 77, has changed. It is not that, I would also say, our interests have changed. Then what has happened for us to be isolated in such a way? Is it a failure of our negotiators? Is it a kind of a failure which people like Mr. Muspun Dubey have brought upon this country? Or is it that our political perspectives have so changed that we prefer this splendid isolation, as it were, not so splendid in this case, because we have been bludgeoned from all sides, being isolated, to standing up with a group of countries. I can give a few instances of exactly where these things happen, but I don't think that is necessary to do so. The situation as of today is that if Mrs. Carla Hills is not satisfied by our policies with regard to intellectual property rights, then she takes unilaterally, under her law, legitimately, unilateral action against India, putting countervailing duties or whatever other methods can be taken to penalize. Supposing she decides, as I said yesterday, supposing she decides not to take action against us, then of course there is a until draft where we will come under multilateral regime with the force of international law, where the same situation will be more or less before us. We will have to amend, change our laws enacted by our sovereign parliament in accordance with wishes, desires, positions taken by other countries. This is the minimum that will happen. There are many other things which the speakers yesterday talked about. Now, what do we get in return for this? Do we in any negotiation you give something in order to get something? Whether it's carried out on a level playing field or a non-level playing field. Now, what do we get out of all this? There is a promise that we will modernize, we will be integrated into the global market, that we can export our things to those countries, etc. Now, yesterday it was quite clear that one of our major exports, almost 33% of our exports consist of garments or textiles. On that area, we are getting nothing. Because as Mr. Dubey said, it's only in 2018 that suddenly some miracle will happen, and therefore the multi-fiber agreement will be integrated now into that will be different. We are not getting anything on that. Where are the other areas in which we could gain in terms of exports? In terms of agricultural subsidies, the fight is between USA and the EEC. We are not been players in that fight. Nevertheless, the point is that precisely to the same markets where we are trying to export our products.
So this is the kind of trade. What about other commodities which we export? We export a fair amount of industrial raw material, iron ore for instance. Other minerals. Now there's a world recession, everyone keeps talking about it. Everyone also keeps talking about the fact that the mineral intensity of manufacture is becoming less and less. In which case, the prospects for our trade in this area to go up is very limited, and let's not make any mistakes about that. Then there are other constraints also. There are constraints of infrastructure. Even if you mine large amount of, we have 500 years worth of iron ore, 500 years of the world's requirement of iron ore in our country. But even if we mine it all, we don't have the railways to transport it, we don't have the ports to take it, and we don't have buyers at the other end. To buy them. The same constraints apply to other natural resources that we also have. We export some amount of engineering goods. The only engineering goods in our case which are now competitive are manual covers, cast iron manual covers. Even the hand tools that we were exporting to the United States in the late 70s. Mr. Dalai doesn't like the kind of trade balance which is
There is already an anti-dumping duty on manufacturing.
Yeah, I was just going to come to the anti-dumping duty, so I was only talking at the moment of economics, not politics yet. But since this issue has been brought up, I will take it up right at this stage. What is the intent of the US Trade Act as it applies in the case of Super 301, as it sought to be applied to Japan, Brazil and India? In the case of Special 301 to China, Thailand and India. India is the only common country in the two lists. The intent is to right the balance of trade of the United States. And it's a very legitimate concern of the United States to do so. But it means that countries which have positive trade balances with the United States, in the case of China now, which is something like $16 billion, $13 billion. In the case of India, it's about $700 million, a little less than $1 billion. The positive trade balance. That this positive trade balance should not exist. That ideally it should be a zero sum. That is, neither USA should gain nor India should gain out of this relationship. This is the logic of that law. In a world where such laws are premised on such logic, we are being invited to play international trade, but in this case, international trade is monopoly that we have been invited to play. Now, then they take up all kinds of other. It's a little like the story of the wolf and the lamb. The lamb was drinking water downstream. The wolf said, "You're dirtying my water." The lamb said, "No, I am downstream." Then the wolf said, "No, if you haven't dirtied the water, then your father must have dirtied the water. In any case, I'm going to eat it." Now, this is the kind of logic which is taking place. Supposing we give in on all the demands of Mr. Carlisle makes, or Mr. Duncan is very nicely presented to us in a 450-page document. Or the Japanese who come in power and say, please, we are only requesting. We are not laying down conditionality. We are only requesting. And if we give in to all these things, what do we get? This is the question which we have to keep asking. There's serious talk in the world trading bodies today of putting anti-dumping duties, not only on account of subsidies, but on account of human rights conditions, on account of environmental charges, and so on. So if our industries are not as environment friendly as somebody else might decide somewhere, that is, our industries, including Union Carbide, are not as environment friendly, then they will put an environmental dumping charge. If our carpets are produced by child labor, which is a very bad thing, then there is an anti-human rights charge which can be put, and so on. This is still being seriously discussed. Now I'm not saying that we should not have environment friendly industries or that we should not prevent child labor, but the fact is that today our production is organized in these kinds of ways. Now, unless we radically transform our production altogether, we cannot compete on the conditions which are being laid down. And what do we get, again, to come back to, what do we get in return? What we get in return is vague promises of territorial security, of national security. It's not an economic transaction that is taking place. A lot of politics is being brought in. And as is inevitable. So we are told that, okay, if you recognize Israel and perhaps sign the Rafale draft, then we will see to it that terrorism in Kashmir and Punjab, which is assisted by Pakistan, will be curbed. We will stop our help to Pakistan, and that will help you to protect your national integrity. This is the kind of vague thing. Supposing in a negotiation, you have said, okay, you drop this for reasons which may not be acceptable to you, but in terms of real politics, you drop it, and you get so many, let's say, F-16s, tangible F-16s. Or you get infrared night vision rifles with which you can tackle terrorists. One could still somehow understand it. It's not a very it's a good bargain, but nevertheless there is some bargain involved in this. In this case, there is no tangible return that you are getting. The return is in intangibles. Whereas what you are giving is tangible. Now this is the kind of context in which our nation is having to play this international trade on a board which rules are more like monopoly. And how long can we play it? We found that China could not pay it. China paid a huge price, has just paid a huge price for staying out of the multilateral trading system. It has had to sign an agreement with the United States on terms which are, the details are not available yet, but what has come out already suggests that they have given it far more on the intellectual property rights, for instance, than even the national text. But we don't know the details. I don't know.
If you have put out a story, it will be still. It's just He just confirmed what you said.
Okay. Now, the point is that in the case of China, you crack the whip because you say you have been outside the world trading system, and that in order to gain your membership, you have to give in on this. Now, nobody really asks why China was outside the world trading system. Why was China outside the world trading system? Did China opt out to be to be outside the world trading system, or was it that its legitimate presence in multilateral organizations was vetoed repeatedly? By whom? Anyway, the fact is that China was out of the world trading system, therefore they have to play the game. India is not out of the world trading system. India has been very much a member of GATT, very much a member of the United Nations, very much a member of UNCTAD, very much a member of all the international agencies which accept the non-proliferation treaty, every other multilateral treaty. In fact, India has always been in the lead. Now, why is India also being told to play on the same rules that you are imposing on China? Even assuming that the rules in the case of China is there. Now, what is the game in all this? Where does this all end? Yesterday we talked a little bit about globalization of production. And it is that which is globalization of technology, globalization of information systems, which is going to determine the shape of the world. Fair enough. If that is going to happen, then the whole globe becomes one nation, one community. Mr. Gantul becomes the commerce minister for the whole world. Mr. Butros Ghali would become what, home minister?
Globe minister.
And so on. In this case, we don't have problems of our sovereignty and little fights that we have across the border and having to enact laws in our own country, or having to pay for parliament to function, having to do all those things which a nation, a sovereign nation, is today required now. And this is in a sense in one sense, this is what is happening also in the world. Sovereign nations are cracking up. I mean, we saw the USSR. It's cracked up into 16 parts. And the laws, as Boris Yeltsin decides, applies to Ukraine. He decides that the Navy will swear allegiance to him. Therefore, Ukraine is okay. After they make a little fuss, then they are. Now, this is happening in the case of a Commonwealth of Independent States, they call it. I don't know why they call it independent. But are nations really disappearing all over the world? Is the United States as a nation, which is the greatest proponent of the theory of globalization and global interest, is that disappearing? Is Japan, which talks about multilateral trading organization, is that disappearing as a nation? I mean, United States itself will say that Japan is not. Japan is in fact far too much of a nation, far too sovereign. It does not allow, last year in Chiba, the Americans wanted to exhibit 1 kilo of American rice. And the Japanese did not like this idea of exhibition of 1 kilo of rice. The person who had brought it in was arrested and then ultimately released and sent out of the country. Because of their own laws, perceptions, culture, tradition, whatever you might call it, their sense of being a nation, their sense of having intestines with us different from anybody else. But they are a nation, and they are not watering down any of the aspects of their nation. In the case of USA, okay, they are now a customs union with Mexico and Canada, and to that extent, the nation has become slightly looser, but it has only become bigger. Because the rules which apply to this conglomerate, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, are rules which are posited against Europe, against Japan, against Africa, against whatever. It is not as if the rules which govern Canada, USA, Mexico will be the same rules which will benefit, say, Ivory Coast or Burkina Faso and so on. I'm coming to Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso deliberately because these are countries which have one or two commodities. Their economies are based on the production of one or two commodities. In the case of these countries, it's cocoa, mainly, sometimes it's coffee, in some cases it's rubber. And we heard yesterday how the commodities market has collapsed in the last decade. And countries which were dependent on production, their economies were dependent on the production of single commodities or just one or two commodities, have suffered terribly. Now, why has this happened? Is it only because the material component of manufacture has become less because on account of efficiency and technology? If that were so, why would coffee collapse? Because coffee is being drunk by more and more people around the world, and yet prices of coffee have collapsed to such an extent that countries which were dependent on production and export of coffee are today nowhere, and nobody even talks of those countries anymore as players in the international game. Why has cocoa collapsed? Are the uses of cocoa become less? A small diversion at this point. When the cocoa market started, before it started collapsing in the late 70s, when it was still at a high, Unilever, which happens to be a major user of cocoa, started for cosmetics. Cocoa butter is used for cosmetics. Unilever naturally started doing research in alternatives. And one of the alternatives which was found for the cocoa butter, one of the substitutes, was sal oil. The oil crushed from the sal seeds. And from the tree which grows in Chotanagpur, Jharkhand. Now, suddenly this sal seed became a marketable commodity. It has been there, these trees have been there, and the Buddha died under a sal tree. Nobody had sold sal seeds all these years. But suddenly it became a marketable commodity being collected by people there, being sold to intermediaries, who in turn sold it to bigger agents, commission agents and so on, and it went to Calcutta. And from Calcutta it was transported by ship to Rotterdam. Now, two or three interesting things happened as a result of this. One is, to that extent, the economy of the drivers got more monetary. One. Second is that they got drawn into the vortex of the world market. What happened in Rotterdam was going to determine their lives at least to that extent. Third is, because it became a marketable commodity and every seed became a potentially priced item, every seed started being picked up. Now, this had a consequence that the regeneration of sal in that area has gone. Because the new tree, it's a long gestation tree. It takes years for it to grow. And it grows on account of the seeds which fall. The seeds will lie in the ground and then they sprout and then trees come out. Now in a few years' time, who knows, they may not be sal trees, they may not be sal seeds, and then of course the rivers will go and look for some other substitute, perhaps this time in Africa or wherever. This is the kind of structure of trade. But another thing, when the sal seed-bearing ships arrived in Rotterdam, the Dutch trade unions, the left-wing trade union there called FNB, refused to unload the sal seeds because they said noxious fumes were coming out of the hold, the ships. Now this was of course a very touching gesture on their part and so on, because the working class solidarity and all that is there. However, nobody ever thought about the loaders in Calcutta who had loaded the same sal seeds, perhaps inhaled the same noxious fumes in the hold of the ships. But the action of the trade union in Holland crashed the market for sal seeds during that period. And what was selling at 40 rupees a kilo in Calcutta at that time suddenly crashed to 4 rupees a kilo. Now this is another aspect of globalization which takes place. Now, on the issue of globalization, when one looks at all the various aspects of it, one finds that it is a good thing and a bad thing. Nobody opposes globalization for its own sake. Mr. Burnett yesterday said that he is not a Marxist and certainly not a Marxist in the early 70s. Well, I would say that I am a Marxist and I have been a Marxist since the early 70s or even earlier. But as a Marxist, we've always talked about globalization. The Marxists have been the people who have talked of Marxist economic theory is premised on an integrated world production system, exchange system, etc., etc. Marxist theory is also premised, Marxist politics is also premised on a slogan, workers of the world unite, which is as globalistic a slogan as you can get. What the change today, however, is that the issue is not of workers of the world unite, but of bourgeois of the world unite, capitalists of the world unite. Now this is where globalization takes a different kind of a meaning. And even if it were possible, firstly I do not think that the bourgeois by definition of the world can unite. Because the bourgeois by definition is a competitive character. By definition one will get more efficient than the other. By definition one will therefore do the other out of his business, etc., etc. Solidarity among that set is logically impossible. If the premises of what a definition, what a bourgeois is, what a capitalist is correct. Because we talked about how openness will liberalization will sharpen competitiveness is a good thing, etc. Now, if given this kind of a globalized scene where the call is really to the bourgeois of the world unite, what happens to the nation? Marx had said the workers have no nation. Does the bourgeois have a nation? Does the capitalist have a nation? And if the capitalist does not have a nation, as he ought not to, because he is looking at the market, the free market, as free as it is possible, then what happens to the idea of nationhood? If the capitalist worldview is premised on his understanding of his market. Now, if the market is across a border, then the border will be broken. And there are different types of markets. I mean, not just market for produced goods, for commodities, but markets for services, markets for technology, markets for labor, and so on. Now yesterday we already talked about how the labor market is not being globalized, but the other markets are being globalized. It's a very interesting thing that there's been talk about the fax revolution, telecommunication revolution, which will make software engineers in India produce software sitting at home, and they don't actually have to go to Silicon Valley in order to produce software, because they can relate to with their colleagues across the site. The two aspects. One, of course, is that this can be done, and this is correct. The other aspect is that just at this time, the United States is not giving those visas which enable Indian software engineers to go to the United States. Now, it is perhaps not necessary for the United States companies to lobby in order to get the visas for these characters. Perhaps. Or perhaps the United States, for its own reasons, the country which thrives on immigrants, which was built on immigration, has decided that immigration was all right up to a certain point and no longer. Now, even I'm talking of highly skilled engineers, software engineers. I'm not talking of the wretched of the earth who went from Poland or who went from Sicily to the United States at one point of time. Now, in the case of India, it is the best who are going. And this brings me to a very serious thing which is happening to Indian nation. All our attention is focused on the possibility of the secession of Kashmir, the possibility of the secession of Punjab, the terrorism, secessionist terrorism which has taken some shape in Assam and so on. We're talking of territories. These are states, territories, which might go out of the Indian Union. But there has been very little concern about the secession of the successful people from this country. They have seceded already, and we have not even noticed it.
Encouraged.
We have encouraged it. We have in any case not reacted to it in the same way as we react to secessionists in Kashmir.
There are children.
Now, the secession of the successful takes two forms. One is a physical moving out, an NRI phenomenon. The other is a division of the country within itself, which is also taking place. The country today is divided very clearly in at least 2 or 3 segments. One segment is of 150 to 200 million people who are relatively successful, whom Kumar called the Maruti man. And this is a very large number of people. This is equal to the population, combined population of France, Germany and Italy. It's a huge market. So that even if the rest of India does not develop, this is a self-sustaining economy in a certain sense. Now, they have already, in a sense, succeeded while being here, or at least fragmented, of the nation. Then, of course, there are the other segments. The country has legally 800 million people. The 200 million people are there. According to the poverty statistics of the government of India, about 300 million people are below the poverty line, which is pegged at an abysmally low level in any case. So though they have not succeeded, but they have been enslaved. The United States had this experience that there were people who were its population but who were not its citizens. In our case, they didn't have voting rights. In our case, they do have voting rights. They are not allowed to vote. They don't vote. Whatever. So you have that 300 million. So that adds up to 500 million altogether. And then you have another 300 million who are somewhere in between. Now, if the country is being fragmented in these forms, is it any less dangerous than the Sikh terrorists wanting to fragment the country in another way? If these divisions are as deep, now, it is, when we talk of democracy, talk of the nation, talk of sovereignty, it is not just a question of talking at that. Everyone realizes sovereignty is not an absolute. That when you are entering an international negotiation, you are ceding a part of your sovereignty. But in the processes which are taking place around not just international negotiations, but in this whole process of economic liberalization, globalization, whatever we call it, the whole concept of nation, the sovereignty of the nation is being gravely impaired. And it is this that I want to draw attention. And what is it being given up for? Is it being given up for large foreign investment? Yesterday we said the foreign investment climate in the world is not there. And so on. What are we getting? We are getting, in the 80s, we got Maruti cars. Now in the 90s, we are going to get General Motors cars. We just signed an agreement. So General Motors will produce fuel-efficient cars in India in collaboration with no less than the producers of ambassador cars. Now General Motors, even Americans don't drive General Motors cars. But you are a very patriotic American in that case. Just as the government of India still drives ambassador cars, for reasons of state. But General Motors is not able to sell its car. It's almost a contradiction in terms of fuel efficient General Motors car. And yet we are going to get General Motors car. Okay, for some time our elite will be filled with one more model on the road, one more set of colors, and so on. And there will be some market because 200 million people are rich, and 200 million people have a lot of money to spend. So General Motors will be able to sell some of these cars. So much better for the General Motors workers, 75,000 of whom have lost their jobs last month. But what will it do to us? I'm not going to the environment, the technological, the production systems, the management systems and all that. I'm not going to in any case, in this segmentation of the country, I'm without wanting to sound alarmist, I'm also very scared about what will happen to our politics. One of the things which holds us together is democracy. All the segmentations are there. We have some notion of democracy which holds this country together. Now, I doubt if, given these processes, we can continue to be democratic, even in the formal sense that we have been. And I will now, in the manner of the devil, quoting the scripture, I will quote from the World Bank World Development Report. The World Bank World Development Report says that the percentage of inflation episodes which ended in stabilization was 67 for authoritarian systems, but only 29 for democracy. More ominously, 11% of the adjustment programs in democratic systems led to a breakdown of systems 12 months or less after the program started. The report contains statistics about what it euphemistically calls irregular executive transfer. Now, irregular executive transfer sounds a grand system of changing government. It basically means coups. Coups take place in democratic systems. Coups take place in democratic systems. In 11% of them within 12 months of starting a structural adjustment program. 67% authoritarian systems have been successful in managing against 29 democracies. Now, statistically, this is the pattern. Will India fall into one or the other? Will we be among the 29 who manage democracy and the structural adjustment? The pressures, the tensions on India are probably far more than the pressures and tensions in Israel, one of the countries which is supposed to have managed structural adjustment with democracy. What democracy Israel has, of course, is the West Bank residents would be better place to say. But it is this kind of system. And in this kind of system, we've gone so far and we have said, no, we can't go back. There's no halfway house. Now we have to go further. We have to go further. Correct? We have to go further. But at what cost? Somebody will turn around and say that the government, democratically elected government of Bihar, for instance, is useless. It is not performing. And you all know it's not performing. So what is the thing? You can't, if you're going on this track, then you can't have another branch which is going on another track. So you do away with this democratically. It's inefficient. Democracy is inefficient also. And the inefficiencies which are being fought today in the name of globalization, liberalization, what have you, will do away with this inefficient system also. There are very interesting little things which are wisps which are taking place now. I don't know how many of you have noticed the Commander-in-Chief, but no, he is no longer the Commander-in-Chief. He is the Chief of Army Staff, not like General Cariappa, who is the Commander-in-Chief. But General ADRI holds independent discussions with the United States Army or strategic matters. Up to now, yes, we had discussions with USA, we had discussions with USSR, ministers used to do it. And if not the ministers, the secretaries used to do it. But now you have a person in uniform doing it. You know, I'm not saying that Mr. General Rodriguez is going to stage a coup. But when you have people in uniform becoming so prominent in politics, in diplomacy, in strategic negotiation, then somewhere there is some thing to be thought about. Finally, just at the last few minutes, I come to Bihar. Because we are talking of globalization, Bihar is part of the globalization, understand? Now, what is the economy in Bihar? I'll take just one set of people to talk about. There is a caste here, all of you are aware, called Mushars. Now, who are these Mushars? What is the etymology of Mushar? Mushar means moose ahar. That is, those who eat mice. These are people on the margins of the village economy who have subsisted by eating field mice, gleanings from harvest, fruit kernels, mango kernels, etc. they thrown away, and whatever else they can get on the margins of the village economy. The village economy, mind you, is not very great. But these people are on the margin. Now, with increasing commercialization of agriculture, what has happened is that the gleanings are not left in the field. They used to be left earlier as some kind of a vague Germanic idea that after you gave it to the barber and you gave it to the blacksmith and so on, and you took your thing, some amount of gleanings is left for the Muslims. Now today that gleanings are not being left in the field. Every year of corn is being picked up. So what happens to the Muslims? How do they get globalized? And what are they going to benefit from liberalization? I'm talking of the Muslims as a symptomatic group in a society like we have. We talk of 30%, 29.8% people under poverty line in India. In Bihar, it's nearly 50. That's one segment that we are talking about. Who are so outside the village economy, who are so outside the production systems, that we have to deal with it. The other lot, Bihar is also a very rich state, as you can all see, all around us. There is a great deal of money. There is a great deal of money which is floating about. There are doctors in Bihar who make, I mean, one doesn't have to name people, but who make lakhs of rupees in a month. Now, what do they do with this? What do they do with this money? They buy land, and then they sell the land, then they buy some more land, and so on. There have been cases of people whose houses have been raided once in a while, who have had cash stored, which have been eaten up by mice. Okay, not the mice who the Muslims. Now, here we have a lot of money. We have a lot of money, but this money has neither, according to Marxist classical political economy, neither use value nor exchange value. And I'm grateful to Mr. Kamla for this discussion we were having outside. It has neither use value nor exchange value. Okay, so what value does it have? It is like the lilies of the field. Who spin not. Now this is the money that is in India. One could perhaps justify corruption, etc. if this were primitive accumulation. We all know that accumulation can be fairly primitive, and in fact it is primitive in many cases. When the Japanese go and conquer Korea and Manchuria, they are doing primitive accumulation. When the United States imports slaves, they were doing primitive accumulation. When the Spanish looted the Inca temples for gold, they were doing primitive accumulation. So if accumulation is primitive, there is no great morality attached to it. But are our people even primitive accumulators? Or are they just primitive? In the case of Bihar, I think that is the issue which we have to ask. Now, in this kind of a primitive situation, you have the ultra-modern free market, globalization, liberalization, what have you. In between are your patented biotechnologies, patented drugs, patented pharmaceuticals. This is a state, by the way, which has the highest incidence of poverty, and disease there. Now, what happens to these people? The chief minister here says the medical college is the high court for the poor. It pronounces the sentence of life or death. I think he's correct. Now, in that kind of a situation, with patented medicines, with the intellectual trade property regimes, with Carlyle, with Dunhill, with everything, what happens to those people? Okay, only 10% medicines will get involved, and etc. We all heard the logic. But we are talking of people who cannot even buy an aspirin.
They don't get medicine now, they won't get medicine.
No, they get medicine. They get free medicine. They get free medicine now under a subsidy, a total subsidy, or under charity. Now, my argument against this whole system is that it does away with concepts like charity, it does away with concepts like self-esteem, it does away with concepts like nationhood, it does away with concepts. That is what my problem is on this. And what happens to your farmer on whose field this Moser is going to pick up or not pick up greenery? When you have this biotechnology patented. We all know that up to 1967, before the Green Revolution, such Green Revolution that came to Bihar, the Green Revolution which came to Bihar only consists of seeds, not even fertilizer. And these seeds are non-regenerating. You have to buy seeds every year. Otherwise, the productivity falls so drastically, it's not worthwhile cultivating. Now, our farmers have been buying seeds, which is why Viscoman building is across the road, massive building that they have built, because of the profits of the seed selling business. Now, when under non-patented biotechnology, you had that kind of a system coming up, what will happen when you have this kind of a force? Now, it is in this context that we are talking about free market. Thank you very much.
We are running a little behind time, but it has been very enjoyable on the scene. I'd like to advance the tea break a little, because we will now have the tea break. I was planning to have it after the Nanpam Srivastava delivered his lecture, but we'll advance it a bit and start again, I think, in 10 minutes time. I don't know, I think we can have a full, proper, enjoyable tea, but we'll do whatever we can.
Refreshing part of refreshing aspect. Most refreshing aspect of my presentation would be that it would be very short. Besides, I'm not a seasoned presenter in the seminar, so as you can see from my experience with handling the mic. Now, I don't have very organized thoughts. I'm going to share a few views with you. The hypothesis basically that I'm presenting is not strictly related to India. I'm trying to, in the end, draw lessons for India. In this presentation, a case study would be South America, the Andean region, the northern Cordillera of the Andes Mountains, the Andean Mountains. The northern Cordillera section of it, the countries in it are called Andean countries. I'm taking up two case examples. The first one being Venezuela, as one of the Andean countries. And within Venezuela, petroleum sector of their economy, which is the key sector of their economy. And the hypothesis I would like to build is that Venezuela, within the dependent metropole satellite linkages that it has with the United States. Within this dependent matrix, this country has tried to evolve its own variant of a free market economy. And to a certain extent, it has succeeded. And to the extent that positive economic performance can be related to political legitimacy of the government, the democratic regimes of Venezuela have received an enhancement in their legitimacy because of the success of their economic program, which essentially, as I said before, relates to their petroleum policies. Now, in a couple of minutes, I'll give you a history of, not a very working history of how did Venezuela, how did the petroleum sector come about to be its most important economic sector. 1917 was the year when oil was struck in Venezuela, and that was the time of the World War, First World War, and oil, obviously, as you would all appreciate, was very strategic, the important commodity. So there was a rush of multinational concerns beginning with Exxon, or SO as they used to call it then, and various other Dutch, quickly followed in the 20s by the American multinationals. There was Seven Sisters, the seven important petroleum concerns. They moved in, and around 1928-30, is about the time from when the returns from petroleum exports started figuring in as the most prominent or the dominant part of the government's foreign exchange receipts. At that stage, Venezuelan government, in fact there was a dictatorship, a very long dictatorship, Juan Gomez, he ruled till 1935. Now up till that stage there was really no structured policy towards petroleum. As a matter of fact, what the government did was there was only one national consensus on the petroleum issue, which was to extract as much of the profits that you can from the operations of the foreign companies as possible. So basically there was an incremental tax burden that was being imposed, or sought to be imposed on the foreign companies, which they obviously resented, and therefore there was this tussle and a policy of allocation. And then through the 30s and 40s there were a series of hydrocarbon reforms laws, and interestingly Venezuela also had one law which the companies resented very much, which was that the subsoil, the minerals or whatever you obtain underground are always going to be inalienable rights of the government and the state, and therefore the companies which paid huge amounts of money to lease or have a contract to operate on that land could never really claim the rights over what they found, even though they were prospecting and exploring. And thereafter, until 1960s, basically the same policy accentuated, and there was a narrowing down of official policy towards a greater and greater extraction. There was a gentleman I would like to mention from the Venezuelan economy there, Pedro Alfonso. He was the man who authored, and in so many ways he was the principal mover behind the formation of the OPEC. Because during World War II, Venezuela had been a very durable, very reliable supplier of petroleum to the United States, and this country, like most of the Latin American neighbors of itself, they've always been reacting within the dependent matrix. So Venezuela, through its petroleum, had in some sense tried to prove its credentials as a durable supplier, a reliable partner in trade with the US, and had also tried to bring home the fact to the US economic circles that here we are with a relatively low-priced petroleum. We also have extremely high reserves of heavy tar, and that we are situated very importantly in an area which is basically non-conflict stationary. If you compare this with the Middle East, where petroleum had been struck, and oil had been struck by then, Venezuela being a very safe zone, there would be no short or medium-term interruption in trade linkages, and therefore US should accord some more of primacy to its trade with Venezuela. within, of course, given the context of their economy, their sizes and stages of development and so on. But then since this has not been followed up by the US in the same measure that Venezuela had expected, Perez Alfonso had been one of the movers who then collaborated with the Middle Eastern counterparties, and in a notional sense, the concept of cartelization came up, and that is then formed, 14th of September to be exact, 1960. And quickly after that, Venezuela also nationalized its formed first state-owned company. It's called the CVP, Company Venezolana Troyos. These are all Spanish terms. Now from then, there was a kind of policy enunciation which was clearer to the foreign companies, and at the same time even more unbearable to them, in the sense that it was very overbearing on them. And the percentage of tax which went up reached a stage, at the stage of, say, the beginning of 1970s, that they began on a conscious policy of disinvestment in Venezuela, and they began shifting to other countries, countries of the North American Accord, Canada, Mexico, and so on. And then comes the first oil shock, and the first term of the presidency of Carlos Andres Perez, who is currently also the president of the country. Right from his initiation into office, he began a set of measures. For instance, he instituted presidential commissions, and he nationalized their steel, their oil, their iron. And it was quite clear that nationalization of oil was also on the anvil, which he duly carried out. And from the first day of 1976, Venezuela had all its earlier state-owned companies merged into one big giant company called PDVSA. This is Petroleos de Venezuela, South America. Now thereafter, this company has, the point that I'm trying to write home from here is that once PDVSA was formed, the government of Venezuela began a collaboration with its giant concern. When I say collaboration, I mean the foreign policy was then going to be shaped more and more, or modified into foreign economic policy, where the implementation side of the policy would be taken care of by the giant company, and the government would be giving it, issuing it policy guidelines, as well as helping this overall joint collaborative policy by entering into government transactions within the Andean community, within the South American subcontinent, as well as outside. Now, I don't wish to bore you with details. I'm sure it will become boring already. This company, PDVSA that I'm calling, it entered into contracts with countries like Nigeria, for instance. They were operating behind the scenes in the OPEC regulations, so that they could barter their heavy and light components. It entered into a technical collaboration with Weber Petrochemical Corporation of Germany, or FRGS then was. So that, this company, I'll give you the importance of the company's operation of the petroleum sector in the national economy. 26% of the GNP of the country is from the petroleum sector, and almost 85 to 90% of the entire foreign exchange received from the country are also from the petroleum sector. And this has been the story over the last 2 decades, not just 1 year. But then it employs less than 0.6% of the total technical manpower available there. So when it entered into such contracts with foreign companies and sent its manpower abroad, what it aimed to do basically was A, give them field training abroad so that you can come back with the first-hand knowledge of what actually the international petroleum scenario is, and also generate some employment and answer some of its national obligations of not becoming too arbitrary, or not becoming too capital intensive, or not being too divorced from the actual realities of sowing back its profits. And in fact, that was the stage when their policy was, in the Spanish term, sembrar el petróleo, which meant that you
would try to sow that petroleum. And sowing essentially meant that the seeds that you get from petroleum, you sow it back into the non-oil or non-petroleum sector of your economy in an integrated fashion, in a non-inflationary, all-around indigenous growth of your economy, which is all planned in terms of broad policy outlines, and thereafter you give a maximum amount of freedom or latitude of operation to those economic incentives that would make the economy come up. So this is how it went about, and through the 80s after the nationalization, this company has stayed afloat right from the first year after the foreign companies were sent back. Their dividends and their shares were paid off. In fact, as they left, they had been given service contracts so that later they could come in for specified times and operate. And one of the regions where it wants them to operate is their eastern sector. It's called the Lake Maracaibo and Lake Orinoco. This basin has got the highest reserves of heavy tar in the world. In fact, it's believed that the entire world's heavy tar requirements can be supplied for 550 years if only Venezuela's heavy tar can, there can be foreign companies who can come and explore so that the commercial feasibility of production can be ascertained, and thereafter this can go really into the international market. And in fact, I can remind you, or may I remind you, that after the second oil shock around 78, 79, a lot of European and American companies had gone in for industry, had gone in for structural adjustment, because there was always this fear of short-term interruption in supply of petroleum from the Middle East. So they had gone in for adjustment so that they could utilize the heavy tar, which was really not a polemical issue then. So in that sense, Venezuela made a very strong case of coming up as a country which would then supply this. And as recently as October last year, there was the 13th World Petroleum Congress, where again this thing has come up. Now what I'm trying to say is that there is a collaboration between this company and the government. It is a mixture of command economy as well as individual entrepreneurship, which has yielded dividends to the country. I do not say that Venezuela's economy has come up or that it is a force to reckon with the international economy. But certainly, if you consider from its starting point, where it was a country like Mr. Das was mentioning for me, these monoculture economies, we talk about Africa, Asia, a single commodity or primary commodity producing exporting countries. They really don't have any control to exert over price checkability or the externalities, the variables, economic variables in the international market, for instance, price. It's very inelastic, supply and demand. So here is a country which collaborates with its own key government sectors and yet allows scope for maximum latitude of operation of private individual enterprise. So that there is an economic performance which is a level from where you can sow in this return of yours into your economy and then reach a stage where there is some semblance of interdependence within your dependent matrix. And then while staying within that linkage of metropole and satellite, as I said, with the US, then you try and wean yourself away as much as possible within strict economic terms. On the political side, this country has, since I said, their foreign policy can actually be called a foreign economic policy. This country has tried to assert itself in the South American region, has also made itself a little more heard in the world community or international fora. So that there is a kind of presence felt about this country and there is a kind of deplorable, abysmal kind of ignorance about other countries that we witness. It's not the case with Venezuela, which then comes up. Now, I was not going to suggest that India is in a similar stage or comparable stage of economic development. I said before that what I wanted to say was that here is a case of a developing economy which has adopted a strategy which is a variant of free market and has to a certain extent succeeded in coming out of its earlier stage of total dependence on one country and then make itself a little more vibrant so that it can operate sideways also. As also the question that I said was of the fact that if political legitimacy, I'm repeating I suppose myself. Now this legitimacy question is where I wanted to include India, as well as the other case study that I have in mind. I hope I have another 5 minutes to go. This is not very important. No, I'm not very organized. I told you I'm not very senior in these things, so I don't know how I'm saying it. Basically, what I wanted to say was that if economic performance, in fact, Mr. Praful Bidwai was saying yesterday that the political or the governing elite of any country, if they make promises and if they cannot keep this promise of satisfying at least the minimum needs of their society, they have absolutely no reason or legitimacy to govern. Now in India too, or broadly speaking, if economic performance in a controlled economy or in an economy where state have some role to play in the guiding or policy outlines of the economy, if the economic performance is to be linked to political legitimacy, then certainly India is probably going to face a situation, if it doesn't already, of greater questions about its own political legitimacy. And I fear, though this is in a purely speculative realm, that if the current parliamentary form of government does not satisfy or does not enjoy the same kind of political legitimacy, there is already talk about presidential form, whether it will be viable. Now I personally felt that any form which is going to replace this would have to become a little more, would have to make its presence a little more felt. It will have to be a little more assertive. So we should have a presidential system. How long will it be that talk would not come up about this active, assertive presidential form becoming, assuming the role of a dictatorship in some ways? And very shortly, in 1 minute, I would quote the example of the other Andean neighbors, which will probably take a minute. There are these 3 countries, neighbors of Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. These 3 countries are essentially now narcotic-producing countries, to the extent that over the last 2 decades, almost 85 to 95% of Bolivia's foreign exchange return basically comprises of the narco dollars that are laundered back home. And this is not even 30% of what is actually earned and then stashed in banks in the US, in Caribbean. So also in the case, though, with lesser dependence, in Peru, a question of for the fact that these are illegal commodities and therefore part of the parallel economy. But the fact remains that their central banks or their governments consider it so important that when this money is laundered in the streets, there are particular areas where this money transaction goes on every day. The central bank has opened a window in each of these countries, especially in Peru and Bolivia. It's opened a branch where money is laundered so that that money is not lost directly to the black market or the parallel economy, but that it goes back to the government. It comes back into the national economy in some sense. They call it the sinister window, the Ventanilla trap. Now, apart from the moral question of whether or not you should include this into the legal economy, I mean, there was a lot of moral cry about prostitution, alcoholism. They all got legalized in the end. I'm not saying you should legalize drug trafficking. All I'm saying is that if it were to be considered, the basic reason the governments of these countries are facing is they cannot in any way supply or offer legal economic alternatives to the people who are growing coca. Therefore, their claim that these people should not be growing it is basically lost, because people who are so poor that they are starving have nothing to lose if they grow something. Morality comes later. You know, their basic needs come first. And these narco-traficantes, they are called the narco-traffickers. What they've done is they've mixed their acts of terrorism in order to streamline their operation. There's a terroristic means that they've adopted. They've mixed that very cleverly with the leftist movements in these regions, so that you have a sort of smoke screen where you do not know which is actually an insurgency caused by the leftists or actually a violent scenario created because of the operation of these traffickers. So that as a result, the government has to fall back on its military and the right-wing
bureaucratic military elite. In fact, in Latin America, there's this philosophy that you should have 4 children, one in the government, one in the bureaucracy, one in the army, and one in the agricultural sector, so that whichever happens, whichever happens to be ruling the country at that time, you would always have a representation in that. So when you have government taking recourse to the military, what is basically being witnessed in that region is that there is a rightist shift or realignment of forces. And this realignment on the right, am I taking too long, sir?
Please try to wind up.
All right. No, the case I was making was that if you have a rightist realignment of forces in these countries, what it's doing is that it is undermining the legitimacy of the democratic governments in those countries. So there is a successive erosion because of an illegal practice going on, which unfortunately happens to be also governing the country. And therefore, within the same Andean region, you have 2 cases or 2 examples. One kind of practice which enhances the legitimacy of the government, and the other erodes it. And I basically felt that countries of, not necessarily the drug trafficking region of say Asia, Golden Crescent, Golden Triangle and so on, but other countries of South Asia, even Africa to a certain extent, countries which are basically monoculture or very small or at comparable stages. As also they have the additional problem of traditional cleavages in their ethnic, linguistic or national communal side. How soon would it be if you have poverty of that nature coming up and the state is unable to ameliorate them? There is a constant erosion of your legitimacy to govern. There is hardly any space you have to stop these activities, nor indeed the wherewithal. I wanted to go into a little more detail about the US role and so on, but then I wouldn't. I meant initially that it will not be too long before such activities can come up in a bigger way in our area of the world than they have now. And if so, legitimacy based on the ability to deliver to the system would be eroded. Even in the US, as I understood it, the legitimacy of the government rested on the fact that it had the ability to deliver. Deliver meaning it had some kind of useful exercise.
To answer in an intellectual sort of way. It is with that orientation that I thought of saying a few things in today's discussion. But as luck would have it, I find that we have not said anything, maybe that as well. Perhaps it's that you are not a very amateurish thought. All that I would like to say is this, that whether it is a free market system or a kind of committed socialist system that we have, there is no reason why we can't make it work, provided we are able to avoid certain errors, which we have not done. We have not avoided certain errors. Maybe there are a number of errors which we should have done. Some errors perhaps we cannot avoid because human nature being what it is, but there are certainly certain errors which we could have avoided. There are other socialist systems which have worked. We are not the only country in the world which has been for socialism. There are many other countries which have made a better job of it than we have. The question is therefore to identify what kind of errors did we make, could they have been avoided, what can we do even now if the free market forces which have been unleashed cannot be contained, can we do something even now to at least ensure that those who are underprivileged, unprivileged, who are like Mutha, who are beyond the pale of development altogether, who have no independent ability to tackle the market forces which would be set in force. The question is, can we do anything to help them out? There are people who have no purchasing power at all. Who is going to provide the purchasing power? There are people who will be exploited in any system. How do you ensure that they are not exploited? So these are questions which also have been addressed. Unfortunately, whatever views I have on this, I am not in a position to share with you just now. I will just request President Shankar Jha to take over the chair and conduct the proceeding. And I leave you now. If possible, I try to join in the afternoon. Thank you. And I would like to thank and congratulate the organizers of the seminar for bringing so many intellectuals together and organizing a discussion in an atmosphere of total freedom of speech, where many things, palatable and unpalatable, are being said. That is as it should be. And I do hope that the intellectual segment which is evident here today would be spreading wider and wider. Thank you.
We come now to the topic. I think you're probably the first speaker of the last issue, Mr. Sashi Shekhar Sharma. Let us say one thing. It's 12:15. And everyone has in fact gone way beyond the right time, leaving no time for questions. Since we have this afternoon session at 3 o'clock, if you want to give any time for discussion, whether it's now or whether it is later at the end, we will need a little more time than we have. Do you have any objection to stretching this? And we will go to put a long question and answer that now.
One question, sir. Please a few minutes for
introduction.
Speakers should not be allowed to speak anything and get away with it. There will be some corrections made somewhere. That will be too much to expect when speakers are all speaking with their hand on the head.
You see, corrections of fact take 10 seconds. But if anyone
But when Mr. Walker contacted me, he asked me to say something on the question of speaking to the mic, and I think I'm speaking. I will not speak to that. Not to be speaking.
The topic basically assigned was the impact of a free market on value systems. And I think that what he meant initially was its impact on moral value systems, ethical value systems, and also correspondingly social value systems. But I presently have tried to see this whole question with a particularity in my mind, and that particularity is our own national concept. So the changes in economic structure which are taking place in our country, and also the possible impacts which the earlier structure had on our social economic value systems, and possibly the new structure is going to have on subsequently emerging social, economic, and other moral value systems. Now, I do not agree in fundamentals that whatever changes have been proposed presently in the new economic policy are going to usher in a free market. Basically, the policy pronouncements and the documents which are available, they hint at efforts, basic efforts, in fact, trying to correct the distortions which have crept in the economy. In fact, the statement of the finance minister circulated today also indicates in clear terms that they are trying to correct some of the structural, fiscal, monetary imbalances which have been plaguing the Indian economy for last some time. They are short-term and medium-term both. Long-term objectives have not been presently prescribed. Now, assuming that any structural change in a given system is going to usher in a free market system as such, I do not think is the right prognosis of the things. In fact, I also, at the risk of being called blasphemous, I should say that an ideal market situation rarely exists in India. There are always ifs and buts. And when we we talk and examine the measures which are being acted upon recently, the areas which are presently being touched upon are basically fiscal, monetary, and also some internal trade and tariff structures which are sought to be changed. Now, when I'm also surprised that the entire tenor of the discussion was going on around globalization, integration of the Indian economy to the world economy, integration of the world economy as one composite. The current policy changes in our country have been by and large visualized as the onset of laissez-faire, the free market. But these perceptions also, that even the slightest change in an existing policy is considered to be a dramatic revolutionary change of a system. I visualize this also as our acquired reaction to certain ideological stereotypes. Now this is also a kind of a value system. If you talk about something which does not suit your over the years kind of acquired social political belief, it becomes very blasphemous and it also becomes heretical. If you are talking to restructure the public sector, you are becoming imperialist. If you are talking to rationalize your tax structure, you're becoming imperialist too. Now, this also, without going into the details of it, reflects a kind of a value system, a socio-economic value system, and we have been used to such value system, such thinking, and more so in India, I realize that our socio-economic thinking has basically been componentially bipolar. Either you are a socialist or you are a market capitalist. If you are pro-people, you are anti-business. If you are good, then you are not evil. If you are evil, then you are not good. Then we have never really understood the interactions, the relationships, and even the gray areas which are formed when these two kind of systems merge, when these two kind of systems converge. And in our present system also, forgetting about whatever changes are taking place, are proposed to take place, there are areas where the virtues of a free market, the virtues of a command economy are existing and working out fairly smoothly. Now, for example, India has always had a large measure of free and independent economic activity. As was rightly pointed out yesterday also by many speakers, agriculture, large areas of trade, commerce, industry, then services areas have been even pre and post-independence era into private hands. They have been doing very well, and along with the public sector, they are supposed to operate for the general economic good of the society. Now, in such a circumstance, what has happened that because of our ethical, value-related, moral considerations and compulsions inherited through the national movement and other struggles which we have made against capitalism, the ideological primacy was always attached to a sector which was regulated or state controlled, disregarding the fact that the private sector was also contributing equally to the national weal, to the national welfare. Somehow or the other, we considered ourselves morally committed to something which is state regulated, which is controlled, or which is seen to be operating on the basis of public trust. Now, this system, this value also somehow got fostered. And whenever we analyzed our priorities, whenever we set our priorities, it was the component of state economic activity which has always been realized to be the model, both theoretical and normative of economic life. But by and large, every analysis of economic life revolved around the subject of planned economic development in link with public trust. Nevertheless, even in our present society, private free market component of our economic life continued to exist. It continued to exist, it continued to grow, it continued to flourish, and it continued to move. Like I should say, the Galilean sun. Whereas surprisingly, the axis of our trust of the mother earth, the public sector, continued to rot. It continued to decay. But somehow because of a fixation at a certain policy level, this was never accepted as such. Now, there's always comes a point of time when you can just not hide it more. The problems, the defects of a system are becoming more and more apparent. And once you realize that there are certain problems, you try to take corrective measures, somehow or the other, it jars our accepted values. And from the large corners of society, cries of murder emanate. So we basically come back to what exactly was prevailing before this talk of liberalization, this talk of freeing, deregularization, debureaucratization, decontrol started in the early 80s, more so in the middle part of the 80s. Initially, in a society which decided to develop into a socialistic pattern of society, state regulated economy, public sector grew alongside a large area of social life was also being regulated by the state. And in such a situation, the social life, somehow or the other, our moral life, our values regarding social and economic functions got influenced by these regulatory functions of the state. This ideology of the state trying to regulate every function of the social life. Whenever we think of any social function, any independent function, we always started, instead of that, we always started now looking at the state. Even at a fairly lower level of bureaucratic functioning, we realize that the functions which normally should not be seen as to be the purview of the state are now coming into the purview of the state. Smallest issue, like a neighbor's fight, नाली बना दो, सड़क बना दो, 10 रुपए का भी अगर कोई चीज टूटी हुई है तो आपके यहाँ पहुंच जाएगा. A man will come to you, 1,500 रुपए का सामान नुकसान है, a truckload of petitioners coming to you, pressing you, नहीं तो आग लग जाएगी, भूख मर जाएगा. Those issues which were earlier tackled at the social level by a process of social arbitration have now been supplanted by state functions. People have also lost that initial local social initiative to solve local initial social problems. Now, what exactly happened to this model of growth is that without substantially altering the economic and in turn social structure of rural society, the state inadvertently usurped the role of arbitrator of economic and social behavior. Economically, our society remained more or less where it was. Socially, it started losing grip on its destiny. Elders became redundant, societal consensus was lost, group interest, as reflected in various state policies, surfaced to assert itself. Over a period of time, therefore, a reference point for social action was also corresponding state policy. Individual and societal behavior, apart from civil obligations and criminal liability, were now examined in the light of an extra local yardstick. This is how a person is behaving, this is how the authority behaves, and I think this is the most desirable form of behavior of our society also. There were no doubt serious flaws in the old system, but those flaws seldom really threatened social calm beyond a certain point and never went beyond the sphere of community-sponsored reconciliation. Economic interdependence was lost sight of when we started developing in the flourish of a national state-sponsored economic regime, where for nearly 2-3 decades local problems never really entered economic planning and always never offered local solutions. We somehow viewed that phase as a non-personal economic and political straitjacket. Then some rethinking, reassessment started in the intervening periods, and national values also became a role model for individual behavior. Sadly, it also became a force of habit, almost Pavlovian, as those values and standards deteriorated over the time for reasons not necessary to really repeat here. The following social value and behavior changed, so much so that even the atrophied role models, political, social, economic, normative, new standards of social also became models for corresponding new standards of social expectation from the system. For example, corruption being accepted as a legitimate economic activity, bravado as efficient virtue in civil public life, pusillanimity as tact, and giving up your fight as adjustment to reality to be named very few. An officer is supposed to be tactful who can accommodate things. you can generally take everyone along. You are very brash if you are trying to stick to rules in a very positive way. Now, simultaneously, this has also created a very legalistic frame of social behavior. And this was because a large number of laws also started regulating even finer points of social interaction. Now, a large number of laws came into being seeking to determine social and communal behavior. In many cases, these had no reference to existing social reality, and therefore they used as an alibi for real beneficial central intervention or a regulated intervention. Therefore, a lot of social legislation remained dormant. You create a law because you know this problem is agitating you today. Nobody is really serious in implementing that. And laws always were there on the paper. They were being disregarded because it was not really important. It was not based on national consensus that this law is important. And even if an unimportant law is violated, it gives the wrong kind of message. That you can get away with the violation of even the right kind of laws, the important laws, and this creates a wrong psychological, moral framework for the society to function. When this happens, it's not difficult to assume that disregard for one kind of discipline leads easily to disregard of another kind. Somehow or the other, I don't know exactly what will be the sociological interpretation of it, but we think that the present level of chaos, where even the breaking of law, in fact in the strike I was coming on my scooter 2 days back, some of the employees were discussing there, the one person asked about a particular man, kaisa aadmi hai? दूसरा उसको कहा, I tried to tell it because it cannot be translated in English. The force of it will be lost. एक ने कहा कि यार कैसा आदमी है, थोड़ा बड़ा धाकड़ अफसर है. काहे तो धाकड़ का है, साला एको दिन ऑफिस नहीं जाता है. जब गया भी तो अफसर को हड़का के रखता है. एक तो फाइल नहीं छूता, लेकिन मजा है तो उससे बोल ले. Now the virtue of a धाकड़ person, an assertive officer, is an officer who rarely goes to office, who rarely attends to his legitimate jobs. And still, every superior and inferior is in mortal fear of him. That man has acquired a social respectability. Breaking of laws, breaking of social values has suddenly acquired legitimacy because this is how we are visualizing it is in a social system where consensus is based on legalistic jurisprudential values. That kind of behavior, aberrant behaviors will definitely be there. And I also think it has got something to do with our Hindu way of life. I don't know how. I stand to correction, but there doesn't seem to be any other explanation. I think this is the only way of religious moral life which doesn't have a really very structural and legitimized code of discipline. You are born a Hindu. Hindu in the sense I say Indian virtues, not meaning any communal overtones in that. So I am painfully reminded of this positive time. Okay. You can enter into any aberrant behavior in the framework of that society, and you can get away with that. A person was free to take a stone somewhere, install it, declare it to an idol, and start a cult of its own. You can eat whatever you want, you can drink whatever you want, you can commit anything which was not legally in that framework under codes wrong, and still continuing to a part of the orthodox society. Nobody was a heretic, nobody was declared panthaya. So that process of living your own life, having also an individual reference to moral social codes continued, and it was surprisingly used only for the wrong kind of purposes. That individualism, that spirit of enterprise could have been used for better management of economic and social life. Like Japan used it. A very traditional society where the lord, the daimyo, was the ultimate center of power and loyalty. Now when Japan was industrializing, probably that same concept of loyalty was transferred to the corporate body, to the firm, to the establishment, to the economic life, leading thereby, I think, a very fierce loyalty to a new economic structure. It created a new corporate culture, economic culture I should say, and so much so that a new Japanese style of management, which has become a new subject, a new study of discussion, has come up. Now that much being as it is, still one cannot deny that, okay, there are problems. the problems need to be sorted out. The problems need to be sorted out in a certain kind of environment. Any problem which does not take care of its environmental requirements, any solution also which does not care of its requirements is not going to be accepted universally, is not going to be beneficial to the goals, to the society. Now, whenever we propose any change in policy, importantly in economic policy, it cannot be based on extra-national considerations. It has to have an element of national consensus in it. As it was rightly pointed out, what about the man who is at the margins of economic activity? A person who is socially deprived, a person who is economically deprived. What provisions are we making when we are talking of liberalization and free trade in our policies for that man? What about the welfare measures which the state is supposed to take, particularly in a society which is not at a very high level of development, in a society which needs such intervention? So, a kind of national consensus will have to be built, and every element of such consensus will have to include the aspirations of majority of the sections of society, the underprivileged, the people who are socially, economically marginalized should feel that the process which has started is also useful for them. They should also partake of the growth of this. Secondly, the changes which occur because of any economic change are not necessarily bad or good. Sometimes, see, a particular kind of a system does need a particular kind of an ethical moral framework. For example, even in the present system, about 10 years back, a worker in Bombay, a worker in Ahmedabad, if he earns some profit, he'll probably invest in shares, he'll invest in mutual funds. But a worker in Bihar, if he has some surplus, investable surplus, he'll go back home and buy some land or mortgage some property, invest in real estate. Now, it is not that this has got strictly to do with only with his feudal past, as it is normally stereotypically believed. It has also got to do because with a reality that in Bihar, you do not have even opportunities to invest in properly in industrial ventures. Now, here in Patna or in Bihar, most of North India, which is not industrially developed, the highest point of social virtue or social glamour is to have a large freehold plot on which to build a good bungalow house. I don't think in Bombay or in the congested urban industrial cities where real estate is at a premium, anybody can think of such unproductive and profligate use of economic assets. Where you can have 100 flats on a small part of land, and here is one man. Still, where Patna, a lot of flats are coming up, but it is not at a premium. People would still prefer to have a small part of their own, of Mother Earth, to build their house on. Now, these values, you don't force by legislation. These are economic circumstances which create new value systems. Necessary to adapt. Some, like the growth of a mobile, small, compact family unit. It's not necessarily bad. It is necessary. It has grown to suit itself to the new realities. Working women, initially probably in a small rural town of Bihar, a woman riding a cycle will be only a lascivious curiosity. But there are places here where even in Jamshedpur, Ranchi, a woman going to work or driving a motorcycle doesn't even raise your eyebrow. So situations change, ethical, moral values are changing, and we have to somehow see to it that these changes correspond to our general national aspirations. They correspond to what we think is good for us, where every segment of Indian society, there are problems of the landless laborers, of the poorer sections, of the marginalized people, are fused into it. And when the size of the economic cake grows, and there are mechanisms to ensure that every person does have a right, a growth in their prosperity, there will be a harmonious correlation between economic changes and values and attitudinal changes. And surprisingly, I'll just take half a minute. Even when we decided on our model of economic growth, it said socialistic pattern of society. I don't think it meant socialistic pattern of economy or socialistic pattern of trade. It said socialistic pattern of society. Now, you can have a socialistic pattern of society. We do have a very fairly, given some discussions, we are trying to sort of go towards a socialistic pattern of society. And for that, a trade reform in an economic structure need not necessarily be in contradiction to it. It can be supplementary to our efforts to achieve a very just, honorable and social society. But we only have to be careful to avoid the pitfalls of going too global or becoming too xenophobic. There has to be a midway somewhere. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
They are now called on Mr. K.M. Tiwari.
Mr. President and friends, I'm thankful to the organizers of the seminar for giving me the opportunity of being here. And I'm particularly thankful to Dr. Shivani for inviting me to take part in the national. I'm thankful to him particularly because he asked me to talk about art in the context of problems and prospects of economic development. Listening to the talk here, the presentation, I was struck with a sense of unreality about the whole thing, particularly with regard to art. Art has no role to play since to be the economic development of India. What I'm therefore addressing myself to is the relationship between arts in general and markets. Whatever kind of market you have in your mind, the relation between market and the art. One of the unstated assumptions of this presentation is that the difference and ethics of markets are quite different from the difference and ethics of art. And whether it is a state planning the economy or the market, dictate returns to the art. The interaction between the two is necessarily detrimental to the art. This may be a very conservative position to take, but in the face of the chanting march of free market all over the world, it's necessary to take conservative point of view that the two do not mix well, and the two constitute different orders of the art. But the artist has to live in society and he must earn his keep in the world. And therefore, he has to sell his product. At this point in this paper, I make a difference between producers of art and producers of other kinds of goods and services. The producers of art, thanks glory be to God, society considers them to be artists, creative artists. They are not usual kind of producers who are motivated by the principle of profit and loss and credit and debt accounting. The artists have been accorded a position different from higher than the position accorded to producers. And those who enjoy and appreciate art, they are not considered to be consumers. I think it's blasphemous some years to compare producers of art to the producers of any other kind of commodity. And the producers are consumers of art as to compare the consumers of art to any other kind of consumers. These are connoisseurs, these are omniscients, they are called, they are experts. So the two planes of reality on which art and market exist are quite discontinuous with one another, that they do not go well together. There is one thing more, that when the art comes to the market, or whatever comes to the market, is turned into a commodity. Artistic goods are not commodities. They do not possess an exchange value. They do not have a price tag. Their value is quite different, and that's part of the value system of the society. The laws that may be said to regulate creative artistic activities are primarily aesthetic. And the laws of aesthetics have creation of beauty as their sole object. Whatever be the medium, the artist is a person who seeks to create beauty in and through a medium. The value of this artistic achievement varies directly with its beauty. And in the context of markets and economic development, we talk about beauty and aesthetic objects seems to me so unreal that I hesitated to speak about it, but I thought there would be a fair hearing given to the position of the artist in the context of the market, and that's why I am using your time. In the world of art, beauty of work is primary, its utility is secondary. And the world of market is the utility of a commodity that is primary, its beauty is at all in consideration, secondary or even lower in estimate. That is, a commodity is designed and produced and marketed with the purpose of satisfying some tangible, physical, material needs of human beings. A work of art is created to express and communicate a particular vision of beauty, which may be looked at as the satisfaction of a spiritual need, if it be considered a need. A creative aesthetic object has no other purpose beyond itself. It's intransitive and reflexive. It's self-contained and sufficient unto itself. It contains within itself the necessary and sufficient reason for its being, beyond the reach of the price mechanism and exchange rate operated by the forces of market. It may be argued that this view of art for the sake of art impoverishes art insofar as it divides it empties it of its high moral purpose. It deprives art of its human value and its moral content. But even if we attribute moral purpose, human value, and social significance to an aesthetic object, which it may be considered to possess by virtue of being an aesthetic object, there is, to my mind, no way it can be assimilated to the ethos of money. And that is the essential point. Actually, I don't know of any market mechanism that can weigh and measure moral purpose, human value, aesthetic experience, and uniqueness of vision embodied in an object of art. In other words, market doesn't stimulate creation of aesthetic objects. This is not its function proper. It doesn't even legitimately mediate between artists and their audience. But what is stressed is that market does not enter the creative process of art, nor is it relevant to the proper appreciation of art. Whether art is conceived as knowledge or aim, ritual or social conscience, pleasure or ethical communication, market remains alien to it. Art may be considered a kind of conscious daydreaming fantasy making. Market is the icy cold calculation of profit and loss. Art may be considered to be a sublimation of neuroses and complexes. Market is a complex expression of the complex economic forces and their interplay with several imponderables. But surely some may counter art objects are bought and sold in the market, and artists, like other mortals, must earn their living in the market. And wherever the transactions of buying and selling takes place, there is, even if incipiently, market. Market is ubiquitous. True, but beside the point and irrelevant to my way of thinking. The necessity under the compulsion of which the artist must sell his art to live doesn't prove that initially and essentially the artist was inspired by the price it might fetch in the market. And if he was inspired by the price it might fetch in the market, less of an artist is. It doesn't mean that market fires the imagination, creative imagination, as for example a beautiful object, a flower, a woman, a sunset, and myriad other phantoms of delight might and do. Now, market is not the preordained destiny of art. Art addresses itself primarily and principally to human heart and mind, not to market. It's true, though, that market's hostility to the art of an artist can be coercive and even destructive. But it should be borne in mind that the market of art comprises the appreciative audience of which the taste and the critical standards for judgment are formed and shaped by the arts themselves. It's not the market that dictates the test by which a work of art is to be judged. And the standards are not formulated in the marketplace, but in the mystery of human soul, to quote W.E. It's a body of informed and enlightened art consciousness which educates the public at large and promotes proper appreciation of art on terms and conditions that connoisseurs consider appropriate works of creative imagination. It is not the market that lays down rules and formulas for the proper appreciation and enjoyment of the work of art. And it is institutions like museums, galleries, academies, universities, and private collectors of taste and means which protect and cultivate art. Let's note that the market is not governed by the law of supply and demand. This market, I mean, the market, quote unquote, of the arts, and is not motivated by considerations of profit and loss. Even so, arts have to reckon with the seductive or coercive potential of the commercial market. If it ever happens that an art falls a prey to the market, if somehow it is conditioned to adopt the principles and purposes of the market, then it no longer remains art. It turns into an industry. The art of film is a case in point, at least here in India, the kind of film that I have seen. The production, distribution, and consumption of films are quite similar to that of an art film manufactured and marketed by industrial undertakings. Therefore, it is appropriate for us to talk of film industry